Good evening to you. Real sunshine at last, and the dappled light of Westminster is falling on old chaps in top hats and tails, and women in huge hats and silk dresses, as well as soldiers with shiny boots, and more police than I'd realised were actually employed in the entire country. Parliament, in short, is already getting very excited about this weekend's coronation. Even the Speaker's pet parrot's been coached to be loyal. But this coming together of the world of politics and the start of the reign of Charles III leads to an important question that's rarely talked about. What are the politics of the new king? You wouldn't have asked that question about his mother, because the late Queen was so carefully opaque, so restrained throughout her long life, there was never really an answer. We might guess that she wasn't a full-blown Marxist, but beyond that, details were rare and hard to come by. With Charles, of course, it's very different. As Prince of Wales, he was outspoken about the environment, biodiversity, agriculture, global warming, race relations and the behaviour of oppressive regimes abroad. He was no fan of the Iraq War, and he would on other occasions bombard ministers with letters urging them to do this or that, the notorious so-called Black Spider letters, a reference to his handwriting. He has said himself that he is not so stupid as to speak out in the same way as King. He understands the difference. But interestingly, he's been giving what we might call hand signals since ascending the throne. As monarch of post-Brexit Britain, he wanted his first state visit to be to France. And when that was impossible because of the riots there, he went to Berlin, where he spoke to the Bundestag in German. Then in February, when Rishi Sunak was trying to tie up the Windsor framework over the Northern Ireland Protocol, the King hosted Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, at the palace, and he was roundly criticised by Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage for doing so. Earlier on, he gave hundreds of his staff a £600 payment from his own pocket to help them through the cost of living crisis. Was that also a little message to the government? We remember fondly his dear, oh dear, greeting to Liz Truss when she came to see him at the end of her short and disastrous premiership. He's visited a food charity in East London, his son William's been to a homelessness charity and sold the big issue on the streets. More recently still, the King has ensured that those invited to his coronation included more than 850 so-called local heroes who'd helped their communities. Those are people like the boy who slept in a tent to raise money for a hospice, or a teenage leukemia survivor who persuaded supermarkets to help elderly people in Blackburn during the pandemic lockdowns, rather than the usual grand political suspects. I don't think he's party political, but I do think we're beginning to see a pattern here which suggests that we have, put it this way, a liberal or communitarian tinge to the monarchy now. But maybe I am completely wrong. To talk more about this, I'm joined by the historian and columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, Simon Heffer, and the Labour MP, also something of a historian and now a knight, Chris Bryant. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Chris. Do you think, by and large, this is a more liberal monarchy than we had seen before?
Well, I don't think he's a paid-up member of any particular party.
We can agree on that.
And I think he fully understands the constitutional niceties of a little nudge is all right, but a hefty shove is not on. You know, there are moments when I think the monarchy has a beautiful role to play. I remember Princess Diana first visiting an AIDS ward, and not only doing that, but hugging patients. And that sent out, I mean, more than any speech by any MP could ever deliver, that sent out a message. And if liberal means wanting to embrace the whole diversity of the United Kingdom, then I'm right behind him.
He knows very well that the only opinions he can have and can express in public are the opinions of his ministers. And that will be as true if we have a Labour government next year as it is now when we have a Conservative government. So I don't think there's any problem there. There's also a precedent. I mean, King Edward VII, who had been Prince of Wales for almost as long as our present king was Prince of Wales, he was 59 when he came to the throne, was deeply distrusted by his mother, Queen Victoria, in the last 10 or 15 years of his apprenticeship, because he would express political opinions. Indeed, when he became king, he did one or two quite political things. He rewrote his coronation service because he thought it was so objectionable to Roman Catholics that he had to say certain things about them that he deeply disapproved of. He was extremely outreaching to the Jewish community in this country. Many of his closest friends and advisors were prominent Jews, and that too was quite shocking to if you like, a casually anti-Semitic upper class from which he came. And he
also had one of the Sorry, Simon. One of the parts of the gallery at his coronation, of course, was devoted to his mistresses as well.
Well, that's also true. I don't think that will happen this time.
I mean, obviously, one of the difficult moments for Edward VII was Lloyd George's budget in 1909, and then also for his successor, because they had to decide what they were going to do about the House of Lords point blank refusing to allow legislation to go through, and then threatening to and the Liberal government threatening to demand the creation of large numbers of peerages. Now, who knows what mess might come in the future if there's a major battle between Lords and Commons.
Which there might well be, in fact, over the migrants bill going through at the moment. I can see a Parliament Act moment coming then, which is not very far away. We're talking an awful lot of history here, both of you, and I love it, and I think it's really important. But I wonder, do you think the King himself knows this history, thinks about it, and is changed by it? Simon?
Oh, I think he does. And again, going back to his visit to Germany, it has a parallel with the Entente Cordiale. He's aware that our relations with the near continent, and particularly the two great powers on the continent of France and Germany, have been strained by Brexit. And it doesn't mean he takes one side of the argument or the other. Brexit is done, and he will accept his minister's view that we have to, proceed with policies reflecting that. But he, not just because of his German heritage himself, and also his affection for France, but because of the good of the country, wants to ensure that he does everything he can to promote better relations between our three countries, if you like. And this is how he's going to operate. He's going to try and do good, whether it's in the international sphere as a diplomat, or whether his long association with looking after the young people and developing the lives of young people through the Prince's Trust. He will seek to continue to do that. It may upset some people on the right of the Tory party if he's seen to be what you described as too liberal. I don't think it's about being liberal. I think it's about something that will come out from the coronation on Saturday, him following the Christian principles of the church, of which he is now supreme governor.
I'm interested in your view on what strikes me as quite an unusual assertion that everybody is going to be asked to pledge allegiance individually in front of the television set or standing on the pavement or wherever they may happen to be. In one way, you think a very open gesture, taking it away just from the peers and giving it to the people. But of course, like many gestures, it could go horribly wrong.
Well, it's a brave move. I'll do it. I'm very glad to live in this country. I think we have a wonderful country and a wonderful democracy and a free society. And I think the King believes in all those things, and I think the King will defend those things. It's not about him being defender of the faith or faiths. I'm an atheist. I don't really get involved in all that. I do see him as the incarnation of the society that I'm rather glad I live in, which is a society where people with the law can do very much as they want and express themselves freely. And I'm very glad to pledge allegiance to somebody who believes in all that.
Chris?
I think in a very small measure it's my fault, because I wrote to the Lord Chamberlain, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Westminster several years ago about this issue of, in previous coronations, you had the Premier Duke would pledge allegiance on behalf of all the dukes and the duchesses, and then the Premier Marquis, and then the Premier Earl, and all the rest of it. And I said, well, they're not going to be there this time, are they? So what are you going to do? And I think that that's where we've kind of ended up. As I say, all MPs have already done it, so I'd be perfectly happy to do it all over again. But as Simon says, it's a slightly brave thing. I also remember one of the things that has changed in Britain is that we are a much more emotional country than we thought we were 50 years ago. I remember this changed at John Smith's funeral, when there was a massive outpouring across the country. And then for Diana's funeral, I organised big screens in parks and in cathedrals so people could take part all around the country. And there's a measure of that has changed. I think that the monarchy has learnt from that to reach out. One thing that Simon referred to, it's being the Christian values of the Church of England. Well, the Church of England does not allow gay marriage. How does that fit with what I presume to be a very inclusive palace.
One of the many issues on which we don't know the current king's views. Both of you, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting conversation. I learned stuff, and I hope everybody listening did as well.